From Microbe TV, this is Matters Microbial, a podcast about the wonders of microbiology, microbiologists, and microbial centrism. This episode was recorded on May 23rd, 2024. Hello, Micronauts, and welcome once again to today's Quality Quorum. I'm your host, Dr. Mark Martin, Associate Professor of Biology at the University of Puget Sound in Tacoma, Washington. Today is the 42nd episode of Matters Microbial. The countdown to episode number 50 begins. We hope to have some kind of giveaway to celebrate. I thank every listener, viewer, and commenter from the bottom of my microbially obsessive heart. It means so much to me. Summer research has begun here at the University of Puget Sound, and naturally, I involve bacterial bioluminescence. It's who I am. Here are Lux selfies of my Doc Martian research students illuminated by a flask of photobacterium. They love it, so do I. And here is the Lux art that these wonderful students have painted. This reminds me to tell listeners and viewers that my wife, Dr. Jennifer Quinn, and I were asked to put together a video about Lux art for Harvard University's Microbial Sciences Initiative. Here's a screen grab. We had a lot of fun together. I will put a link to that video and the MSI program in the show notes. Jenny and I hope to get some invitations to put on Lux art workshops in the future, as we did before this pesky pandemic. Finally, during our last episode, Dr. Esther Angart discussed giant bacteria with the Quality Quorum. She said something that really resonated with me. Borrowing from Jacques Monod's "What is true for elephants is true for E. coli," Esther reminded us that not all bacteria are like E. coli. And I just adored her maxim, which you can see here as a meme. What is true for E. coli is true for E. coli. And we must remember this as we explore the diversity of the microbial world and keep our eyes open to microbial wonders, because that's what hashtag OMG, overwhelming microbial greatness, and hashtag WTM, what the microbe, are all about. Since I returned to academia in 1994, I have mentored many research students, hoping to interest them in microbiology. 24 of them have or are in the process of earning PhDs. 5 are faculty members now, which is wonderful. Yet, they're all different people with different backgrounds. There is no one path to a career in microbiology, and I find that many students believe there is such a path, that one has to have been interested from an early age or be well-to-do, that sort of thing. One of my goals for this podcast is to show that there are many paths to becoming a microbiologist. And today's podcast guest is Jessica Buchser, recent graduate of Westchester University and entering PhD student in the microbial sciences at Penn State University. She's going to discuss her own path into microbiology, the role that social media has played, her experiences in the lab as an undergraduate, and her hopes for an exciting future as a microbiologist. Welcome to our Quality Quorum for today, Jess. It's a pleasure.
Hi, Mark. It's great to be here.
So you have a very unusual background compared to many of the students around you. Would you care to talk about that for a minute or two?
Yeah, I would love to talk about that. So my background is definitely a little bit different. I decided to go back to school about 10 years after I had initially gone to school. I started out in 2009 as an anthropology major. I wasn't really ready to go to college though at the time. Looking back, I wish that somebody had maybe talked to me a little bit about maybe waiting or trying community college or maybe going to school somewhere a little closer to home, because I decided, as soon as I graduated, I wanted to get as far away from my house as possible, like typical 18-year-old. for me, that was a mistake. So I picked a major that was really interesting to me, but I also wanted the one major that had like no math. So even though I loved science as a kid, I never really thought that like I could be a scientist because I was so bad at math. And it wasn't even that I was bad at math. I didn't even try. Like I was the kid that cut class and just didn't show up. So like, how can you learn math if you're not going to class? So I picked like the one degree in the whole school that was really interesting and had no math, which was anthropology for me. So I really liked it, but it didn't click for me. Something just kind of like wasn't missing, and I ended up dropping out. And I dropped out about a year and a half in. And I moved back home and I started working, and I spent like the next 10 years kind of stuck in that, like, kind of like a rut of just working and wanting more, but I couldn't find a way to do that. I couldn't afford to go back to school. I didn't have time to go back to school because at this point, like, I'm living on my own, I'm working, school's really expensive. And it kind of took a little bit before something happened that got me really interested in microbiology. And so what happened was the COVID-19 pandemic happened. And so there was one day where I was sitting in my car after work, and I had been hearing, in the news that there's this strange virus that's appeared, and I didn't really know much about it. I just was kind of interested. I don't think it had come to the United States yet. I think it was still like we were not sure what was going on there. So I got in my car and I picked up my phone and I found podcasts, and I just typed in the word virus. And this podcast came up called This Week in Virology, and I was like, oh, what's this? And so I started playing it, and I had no idea what anybody was saying. It was complete gibberish to me. I had absolutely no idea, but I drove home listening to it anyway, and I pretended like I knew. And so I was interested though. Like I don't know, there's something about it. Like I wanted to know more. So I started listening to TWIV all the time, and then I found TWIM. And so I would just start to listen to these podcasts like nonstop. I mean, if I was cleaning, I was listening to the podcasts. If I was driving somewhere, I was listening to the podcasts. I was falling asleep to the podcasts. I still do.
May I stop you for just a second?
Sure.
What you just said is just, I'm sure, music to the person I call the Podfather. That's Dr.
Yeah.
Vincent Racaniello. This is music to his heart. I believe he may ask you to make a little isolated recording of that, because that idea of eating, sleeping, I mean, believe me, this is the kind of thing that will excite him. And it's important that everybody hear this, because sure, you had an interest in science earlier in your life, but you had ideas about what that meant. And those ideas weren't really accurate, but no one was there to tell you that. So I'm married to a mathematician. So when it comes to having an allergy to higher math, I really understand that.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's just everyone has different things that they love, and that's what drives them. What's deeply cool about you is you got hooked by Microbe TV.
Yeah.
You got hooked by the podcasts.
I did. Yeah. I really wanted to know more. Like I wanted to understand what I was listening to. So I bought Dr. Racaniello's textbook. So I wanted to learn it. So I found a used copy of the 4th edition. I found that, I ordered it, and then I started going online and I found lectures. I started doing like Coursera courses, which are free, and I don't know how well known those are to students, but for me, they were a lifesaver. Like I could take classes before I actually took classes, so that was really cool. And I started reading papers. I didn't know like anything. I used papers as like textbooks almost. And I like to tell this story a lot because I mean it makes me kind of crack up. But I was working at a propane company, so like in an office, just doing like administrative work, but I was at a computer all day. And my desk faced like the rest of the office. So like anybody walking by could see what I was doing. And so what I would do is I would copy an open access paper, because again, like I wasn't in school yet, so I only had access to what was open access, which is another reason why the podcasts were so important, because a lot of the papers that are discussed are open access. So I was able to get these, and I'd copy these papers into Microsoft Word, and then I would take my company header and I would paste it at the top. So anybody that was walking by would think that I was just working on a document, but I was just reading paper. And I would do the same thing with textbooks. Like I would get an ebook and I would just copy the text and drop it into Microsoft Word. So I kind of like made school work for me before actually going back to school. And then I signed up for community college. So
did you notice that what you did here is and again, this may be an issue of chronology because I spend a lot of time teaching people when they're 18 and 19 and 20. And you mentioned some of the issues with that yourself. But particularly for some people, they spend way more time coming up with reasons they can't do something than trying to solve that problem. And what I want everyone to see in this case is you didn't let any of this business, terminology, definitions of words, it kind of bothered you to some degree. You didn't understand it and you wanted to know, and this is critical, what happened next. Because I believe that what happened next is the kind of the credo of the true scientist in here. You want to know what happens next. In your case, it was what these papers mean, what these folks on the podcasts were saying. And so I think everybody is giving you a huge virtual set of applause because you didn't let anything stop you, particularly yourself. But at the same time, you had an uphill battle because of the necessity for certain courses that you needed to take later. So then you decided to try community college.
right, yeah, and so I started with community college. That was vital. I wouldn't be like going to grad school right now if I didn't go to community college. If that wasn't accessible to me, like if it wasn't available, I couldn't have possibly done it because community college allowed me to continue working full time. And it allowed me to be flexible with my schedule and it was affordable. I was able to pay out of pocket, which was great. Because I didn't need to take out extra loans because at the time I was still paying off loans from like my first attempt at college because I mean even this long since I was there like I'm still paying those off, so that was just really helpful. And so I did that for a little bit until I just couldn't really take it anymore, and I transferred a little bit earlier because I really wanted to take microbiology classes. I got tired of waiting. And So that was really tough. I kind of wish I almost didn't, because I had to still work full time. So I would leave work at like 2, like 1, 2 in the afternoon to go to class, and then I had to come back to work. And then there were other days in the week where I had a lab and I'd have to come in late, but like, for those days where I was either leaving work, coming back, or coming into work late, I had to stay extra hours because I needed to keep my health insurance. So in order to continue with my benefits, I had to basically be in class or at work all day. So that was really difficult. And eventually I realized that wasn't going to be sustainable. So I did end up having to quit my full-time job, which I am in a situation where I was lucky I could do that because I do have a partner that was able to support me at that point. But making that decision was scary. It was really difficult, and it was just it was a big change to go from working for the last 10 years full-time to being a full-time student again. Like, I'm 33, and, at the time I was like 30, and I'm like in class with 18, 19, 20-year-olds. So it was strange. And at times I felt like an outsider. I felt really like, uncomfortable. Like, is it cool if I join organizations? Is it cool if I do research? Like, can I join a lab? Like, is it weird if I do that? So, like, these were a lot of things that I had to kind of to battle with internally. It wasn't easy. It wasn't easy at all.
But you notice again, and I want to emphasize this, we spend a lot of time putting up stop signs and traffic barriers or bollards or whatever you want to call them. between ourselves and what our goal is. We come up with reasons we can't do this. I see this a lot, and I'm not saying this applies to you. A student will say, I can't apply to medical school unless I get a particular grade in organic chemistry. Now, I understand where that comes from, but the focus there is what they can't do instead of what they can do. And what you did, and I don't know how happy you are with praise, and sometimes I do too much of that. But what I'm trying to say is many people focus on the reasons that they can't do things. And you said, all right, this is my goal. This is what I do, what I want to do. And here are some problems that I need to work around. And rather than just saying, that's why I can't do this other thing, you found a way to do those things. And it's an important life lesson. And that's why I think this particular episode is so important for people to hear and see.
Yeah, and like, to be fair and like to be honest, like I for a while I did kind of do that, but that was, before I found like my muse, which was, you know, virology and microbiology. But I did kind of fall into that, especially like my first go at college, like when I wasn't ready, when instead of being like, hey, you know what, like let me find a workaround for this, let me go home and go to a closer university, or let me start again, I kind of sank into that, like, I can't do this, that maybe this isn't for me, even though I knew that it was. Like, I knew that it was. I think for me, it took time to kind of mature, like, to kind of grow and learn from other experiences. I think working really helped me. So I think, at least for my situation, and I think something that I think a lot of students don't really think about, is that like there isn't a set path. Like if you feel like it's not time yet or you're not ready, don't do it, because it's better for you to take the time and wait and grow and learn than to try it and maybe not succeed and then get really defeated by it, because it's okay to not succeed. Like, that's okay. I don't have the best GPA, and that's because I am including classes from, when I went to school 10 years ago, and I didn't do that great. That's okay though. Like, that's fine.
It is.
It's just a number.
Yeah. And I wanted to say a couple of things. Number one, I need to find an artist to depict Vincent Racaniello as your muse over your shoulder. I promise you that would be so epic. If I can find someone to do that, I'm going to make sure you get a copy so you can frame that.
Please do.
I'll bet you he'll sign it too, because if I know Vincent the way I do. Seriously, a lot of folks don't know how important these kinds of podcasts might be. And what you're saying is it was transformative to you. I also wanted to say that you said something that is really important, and it reminds me of the Louis Pasteur's quote, chance favors the prepared mind, which, is a Hallmark card. But at the same time, did you notice what you said when you said if you can't do something, you're not ready? That doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means the timing needs to be a particular way. So when a student says to me, I can't be a physician unless I go to medical school right out of college, and I'll say, well, did you want to be a physician or get into medical school? These are really two different goals if you think about it. And if you don't give up, if you wait for the right opportunity, and I don't mean give up, I mean wait, that's different, because that's what you're describing. It pays off. But right. I wanted to ask, did I hear you correctly that you transferred from community college to Westchester?
Correct. Yep. So I transferred about a year and a half. It's hard to say like how long it actually was into community college, because I have been in school like nonstop, like summers, winters, all that. So like, I don't know if it was 2 years. I don't know if it was a year and a half. I just know that I didn't take all of my plan had initially been to take all of my major major requirements like physics and chemistry and organic chemistry and all that at community college, and then transfer over and just focus on everything else. But I wanted to research, like I wanted to get in a lab. And in fact, the first time I got into a lab and got to actually touch Pseudomonas aeruginosa, well, not touch, but you know what I mean.
I do.
I am pretty sure I texted, like, I don't even know how many people I took pictures of the bacteria and sent them to, like, because I just couldn't, like, people who were probably like, what is this? I don't know what this is. I was just so excited, like, I couldn't get over it. Like, I was actually, like, handling bacteria, which sounds
But that's the goal.
so
I mean, that's what you want to find, something that really speaks to you. And someone can sit there and say, well, nerding out about microbiology as I do every day in my life, and it sounds like you do as well. And they can say, oh, that's super nerdy, but almost everybody has things about their life that they adore and they really value. And the trick in a good life is to find what that is. And you found a niche for you. I found a niche for me. And this is important because it is so satisfying when I hate to be all weird about this. I read a lot of philosophy, a lot of strange things growing up. And Carlos Castaneda, now there's a real can of worms there. In one of his books, he talked about finding a path with heart. And when you're on that path. And that is 100% true. You can talk yourself into things. You can say, oh, I hate this or I love this, but inside,
yeah.
And that's part of, I think, of getting to be more mature, is to understand what that path is. So you went to Westchester and you were able to get into laboratories, and
Yeah.
this is like Christmas Day every day, right?
Yeah, so my first, like, attempt at a lab, like, didn't go so great. There was, like, it was kinda, like, just not a good fit for me.
Sure.
And so I looked for another lab. And this lab turned out to be just the best. So my advisor, Dr. Pashota, he's great. He just got me access to some of the coolest things ever. I got to do scanning electron microscopy, which was like the coolest thing I mean, this is something that like I dreamed about doing as a kid. Like I used to sit on the computer and like Google, scanning microscope pictures of tardigrades or of this or of that. And like I used to think that they were fake. I didn't think that these were real images. I didn't think that was real. And so of course, at this point as an adult, I knew these were real. And when I learned that Westchester was getting this new wonderful SEM, and that I was going to be able to train on it, I couldn't believe it. I was so excited. And so I started that last summer, and that was just like the coolest thing ever. And it started as just like an accessory to the research that I was doing. But it turned into me just like showing up every day with things that I was just making samples of all over the place. So my fish tank, soil, things like just anything that I could find.
In last week's episode, I talked a little bit about that wonderful video. I don't know if you've seen it, about Leeuwenhoek, and it's done with almost little paper puppets. But the whole point of the video is, can you imagine being the first person to see these things? And how amazing that is. And you see, in a way, that's what you're doing. When most people squint through a microscope, it's really hard to see things. It really is. And my eyes are terrible. But with SEM, you can get or transmission for that matter, or as you go on in life, and you will, to do cryo-EM, I know you're going to end up there. Okay?
Yeah.
But you actually are able to see what these things look like at their near atomic level. And it's transformative to be able to do that. So you found yourself a good piece of lab work to do, where you're just observing things under the SEM, and you had a small project because you sent me a copy of one of your posters.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, like what you were saying about being the first to see certain things, that is so. I mentioned like I would take samples from like my fish tank, for example, or just samples from outside. There are times when I look at these images and I'm like, I know I'm probably seeing something that no one's ever seen before. But who knows what it is? Like, who knows? Like, I'm looking at just so many different things, different interactions going on. And it's like, there's an infinite number of questions in every single one of those SEM images. And like, I just think it is just like such an invaluable tool. And so, it just, yeah, I think it's just so neat. But yeah, I got to work on SEM for research that I was doing involving metal containing nanoparticles, where I was exposing escape pathogens to nanoparticles as like an antimicrobial. We were looking to see what the effect was of zinc oxide on two escape pathogens in particular, and to define escape pathogens to their clinically relevant hospital-associated pathogens, healthcare-associated pathogens, Enterococcus, Klebsiella acinetobacter, I said Klebsiella,
Acinetobacter.
Staphylococcus. Yep, yep. Staphylococcus, and did I say Enterococcus? Enterobacter too. But anyway, so I was working with Pseudomonas and Staphylococcus aureus, so Pseudomonas aeruginosa and Staphylococcus aureus. And the reason that we were working with these two bacteria in particular is because they're frequently co-infecting the cystic fibrosis airway. And so I have a sibling with cystic fibrosis, so like it's always kind of something that is close to me. And I don't know if Dr. Pashota like picked those bacteria because of that, but I did talk all the time about how much I like really liked researching Pseudomonas. So when he was like, "Hey, like, how about we do Pseudomonas and staph?" I'm like, "Oh, like."
Well, look, it's really important. We've talked about escape pathogens before on the podcast. And in fact, for a lot of work that I do with my undergrads, we use non-pathogenic relatives of those escape pathogens, say for tiny earth approaches. But what's interesting here, and I want the listeners and viewers to really appreciate it, is that we're reductionists too much. And sometimes we look at one organism as a disease agent, when in fact it's sometimes more than one. And in the cystic fibrosis lung, despite its tragedy for the humans that have it, is a fascinating story of ecology, and I hope to have someone on the podcast at some point to discuss this. But I love how you found a project that was relevant to things that you were interested in, because that's really what drives things. Not checking off a box, but something you're passionate about. And again, you want to come in the next day to see what happened.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Not even just like the next day. Like I was in there on the weekends. Like if I did something like an experiment and I needed to see those results, like I was in there. Like I couldn't get enough of it. Like the looks that I would get sometimes, because like it'd be like almost 9 o'clock at night on a Friday and like I'm in the lab, but like it's just the way that it works out. Like the experiment was like an all-day experiment, and then like to prep the SEM samples, like that took a couple of days. So like if I did an experiment on a Friday and I wanted to see like what the results looked like under SEM, like I had to come in. So it was just like a whole process, and like it just, I don't know, like, so, you know, being an older student, like it's you tend to get, so like in my situation, I tended to get like, you know, at one point I was, you know, kind of called too ambitious or like overzealous. And I think like in retrospect, like I hear that, and like, you know, at the time I was like, oh, no, no, no. Like, you know, I was tempted to go on Amazon and like buy a shirt that said overzealous and just like wear it the next day. Cause like I heard that and I was like, okay, let's go. Like
No, I
I took
think you
that as a
should.
challenge.
No, I
Yeah,
think
I
you
took that
should.
as a
You should have that shirt. Don't explain it, just
absolutely.
wear it.
Right. But I, you know, it's when with interacting with like other students who were a lot younger, like there is definitely a difference between somebody who's still learning what they want to do and somebody who knows what they want to do. And I think it was maybe a little bit difficult for like some people to recognize that like I had the last 10 years to figure out what I wanted to do, and I knew this is what I wanted to do. So for me, like being in the lab until like, you know, 9 o'clock at night or coming in on the weekends, like I was making up for lost time that I didn't have and that I can't get back. So like, you know, 10 years that I didn't know that this was my dream, I couldn't get enough of it now. So like I was just trying to like get that time back almost. Just by how much fun I was having. Like it just felt it wasn't work, you know what I mean? Like it
Right.
just I enjoyed being there. I was happy. So yeah.
So something that you and I have probably seen at the same time, and because you haunt social media as I do. Some people have been talking a lot about quality of life in science, and I really want to draw a distinction here because
Yeah.
many people talk about the fact that there can be unreasonable expectations put upon people at various levels of their scientific career. I am extremely sensitive and respectful of that, but I want to make clear this is something you're interested in. And that's the difference. So I don't want anyone listening or viewing to think that, for example, your drive to be in at 9 p.m. or 6 in the morning the next day. Now, these are things that I've done plenty of times because I want to know what's next. I wouldn't ask other people to do it, although I have had other students want to do it because
Right.
they're invested in it. They want to know what happens next. But quality of life is important. But you also hit the nail on the head because you have more life experience, honestly.
Yeah, and that's something that I'm always, like, conscientious of too when I say, like, "Oh, I was at the lab until 9:30 at night," or "I was there," because like, I don't want someone to hear that and be like, "Oh, like, that's what I have to do too in order to, like, be, a good scientist or, like, to be, like, the level that I should be." Like, no, like, do not go to the lab until 9:30 at night unless, like, you have, like, like, for me, it was like I just lost track of time. Like, I
Mhm.
was having fun and I wasn't paying attention to the time, but it's like, don't ever do that unless, it's something that you really wanna do
Right.
because, like, your time is important, but, and not getting burnt out is really, really, really important, It's if you're at the lab all the time until 9:30 at night and you don't really wanna be there, like, you're gonna get burnt out. So, like, for
Right.
me, I always made sure that, like, if I didn't want to go and I was, overdoing it a little bit, like, I backed off
It's
because I
important to
knew I had to
remember
do
that
that, yeah.
folks spend a lot of time telling each other who they ought to be. And I'm really not interested in that anymore. I'm interested in what those people want to be and helping them be those things. I'm not there's a saying, haters gotta hate, but don't let them dictate. And the fact of the
Yeah.
matter is, someone might say to you, "Oh, you're working too much." And by the way, I love the idea of overzealous for a shirt. I This is haunting me now. Thank you. But the
Yeah, I found it on Amazon, it's real, so
but the fact of the matter is, you get to make those choices for yourself, and that's what you've done. I
yeah,
mean, I know that you're by nature a humble person, but I want you to look at the number of roadblocks that would have stopped most people. And you
yeah,
basically powered through each of them. Now, can everybody do that? No. There are lots of reasons they can't do that. Some of them are exterior to themselves, but at the center were your choices. And I think it's a remarkable tale.
right. Yeah, yeah, definitely, like and, like, I have a lot of robot blocks, and at the same time, I didn't have certain roadblocks that like somebody my age might have. Like again, like I'm lucky in that I have like a partner, a spouse that can support me. I also like I don't have children, so like there's that aspect of it. Whereas other students who are my age, they may have families and they may
Hmm.
have other responsibilities and obligations. And those are also difficulties that I faced in school. Was being held to the same standards as somebody who might be maybe like a lot younger who lives on campus. um that was tough, like and because you don't want to kind of come off as making excuses, like there were times where I would be driving and there really was an accident on the road and I really was late to an exam because there
Hmm.
really was a really bad accident and I really
Yeah.
did leave with plenty of time ahead. But because of like the firm wording in a syllabus, like, no exceptions, like no late, no this, like I would just take the hit because I was like, well, they might think I'm lying. And I just, those were tough times, like to just kind of like deal with that and then just kind of like still, I don't know, still kind of like get through everything.
Well,
Um,
I mean, it's really important. A lot of times, the real key to all this is communication and a lack of mind reading. And these are basically the things that most people try to incorporate into their laboratory or their classroom. You're going to find people that are I'm going to imagine that you just filled in a word I'm not going to use on the podcast. There are people like that. But generally, that comes from a place that has to do with them and not the student who's late for an exam, for example.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean, is that these are things that you learn to negotiate and through, not with, but through. And you do. And that leads us to your decision to go, I think, to graduate school to get your PhD, which is exciting for you, right?
Yes, very much so.
And you had some
Yeah.
mentors at Westchester who could help you with the process of doing this and knowing. And how did you get interested in, well, first off, rather than me saying it, you should say, tell everyone what you're going to go to Penn State to earn your PhD and the program is?
So I'm going to be doing my PhD in biology, but I'm also going to be so Penn State is doing a dual title PhD program, and so the other PhD will be in microbiome sciences. So I'll be applying to enter that probably a little bit later this year. So that's really exciting. I'm so excited.
You should be. And the thing I wanted to say about it in particular is the role of mentorship in all of this. Now, you had wonderful mentors at Westchester. You named one of them. Go ahead and do a call out for that person's name again.
Yes, so Dr. Manu Ramayo, she was amazing in helping me out in words that I can't even like express. Like she just took me under her wing and like she was just a phenomenal assistant in that whole process. Definitely could not do
Energetic
that.
is one word I would use.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, yes.
She's been on the podcast. I'm very fond of Manu. So
Yeah, if I just to kind of like to bring attention to her a little bit more too. So like Westchester is a great school, but there's something really really neat that Manu brings to the university. We always have speakers now, like in our class. So she will have people from different universities come and talk, and if they can't physically be there, she'll have it done over Zoom. And it was just really neat. It kind of felt like we were at a bigger university than
yeah.
we were, because of like all the talks that we were able to sit and see and like be able to experience. I just wanted to shout her out for that
Oh,
because
it's
it's
such
really
a
really cool.
it's such a good idea. I used to teach a first semester writing course on symbiosis and parasitism. So these first semester students, I was able to arm twist some very famous people to appear via Zoom at the time. This is before, in those days it was Skype. Excuse me,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
yeah, it's funny. But what was interesting is that the students would ask questions and then these like very famous professors would answer them. And the effect on the students was riveting because their opinions matter. These aren't names you might see in a textbook or in a YouTube video. They actually got to say things to those. And this is what Manu brought to Westchester is this idea of teaching you that you are part of the scientific community. You are part of the quality quorum. And that's
yes.
wonderful.
Yeah. She was actually offering a class over the summer last year, and I signed up for it, and that class ended up getting canceled, and I was like so upset because like I really wanted to take it. It was like a genomics bioinformatics course, and she I guess noticed that I had been on there and that I wanted to do that class, and she reached out and was like, well, I'm teaching a grad class in the fall, even though I was an undergrad, but we're covering a lot of the same topics, so would you want to take that class? And I'm like, yeah, of course. So like I got to take like, a couple graduate level classes during my undergrad,
Mm-hmm.
which I didn't even know was something that I could do. And if she hadn't reached out and said that, then like I would never have been able to do that. And I continued on taking grad classes afterwards because I knew I could do that then.
This is the role of mentorship again. And, even chronologically challenged people like myself can be mentored by folks much younger, as well as the usual situation where you have someone older with more experience than you have. Mentors are everywhere, and you're not alone. That's really the most important thing. That's why I came up with this term. Okay, I think I came up with it. Other people might feel differently, quality quorum, because we are part of a quorum. and look out for one another. And that's the one thing about microbiology I love above all, is the level of collegiality that I've found there, which is amazing. And this leads us to your decision to have a particular mentor that you hope to do your PhD with at Penn State, right?
Yes. So this is like a pretty cool story in my opinion. So I like, you know, I was looking for programs or nearby. So again, like I have a house. So like I couldn't really go anywhere far because like we own a house. Like we were geographically locked. So I was looking for programs all around, and I couldn't find one that really like gave me that like huzzah that like I wanted. Like I'm like I waited this long. Like I'm not gonna go and then do the next 5 years in a PhD doing something that I'm not passionate about, because I knew where that got me the first time around, with my
Mm-hmm.
first attempt at my bachelor's, and that didn't go well. So like I know me, and I know that like I need to be really interested in what I'm doing. Or there's just like, and I think that speaks for just in general, like don't suffer through something just for the sake of a degree. If you don't like what you're doing, like, it's a PhD is great, but like if you're not getting a PhD in something that, you think you can do for the next 5 years, I don't know how good of an idea that is. So I kind of was like, well, maybe this just isn't going to be for me, because the deadlines were passing, and I'm like, I couldn't find anything. And a little bit of like, maybe like self-confidence and some self-esteem stuff too, because some of the universities that are near here, I'm like, well, maybe they're not going to want me. They're not going to want like, I'm not that great. Which, in retrospect, like now I'm like, psh. But, then like I wasn't sure. Like it was, like, I'm first generation everything. So like I didn't even know I missed deadlines because I didn't even realize that some of the deadlines were so early. Like I didn't know.
Right.
So like there's just a lot that I kind of missed out on. But one day I was listening to a podcast. In fact, it was your podcast. Yeah, with Seth Bordenstein, and I hear like that he's at Penn State, and I'm like, wait a second. So I listened to other podcasts that Seth had been on before, like also like Microbe TV podcasts, and so I knew that he was at Vanderbilt, but I didn't know that he was at Penn State now. And I'm like, well, wait a second. I love bugs. I love bugs. I love bacteria. And funny story too, like 5 years ago when or I don't even know how many years ago it is now, I was doing a Coursera course on entomology. And there were people from Penn State there. And I'm like, I would love to do this. That'd be so cool. But I'll never be able to live at Penn State. So, yeah. Like I like kind of really funny story like that. It's kind of come full circle in that aspect. But so I'm like, all right, Penn State, can we do this? And I looked up like what's the deadline for their grad school application. It was like a week out or something like that, like 10 days out. And I'm like, oh no. And like I didn't even have letters of recommendation at this point. So I sent an email, and I stared at it for like days before I sent it to Seth. I was like so nervous. I'd only written one before, like, and so like I'm like, I don't even know if this looks good. I don't know if any of this is right. And I went to his actual website, and he asked for like, I want like a copy of this, a copy of that, but it said like we're hiring at all levels. And I'm like, well, grad student is a level, so maybe that means he's taking grad students. And so I didn't have anything. Like, I've never published, I've never done anything like that, so I included a paper that I wrote. Like I just included whatever I had, and I sent that along with my email expressing interest in joining the lab. And now I thought like maybe I'm gonna get lucky because like he had like liked one of my posts on Twitter. And so I'm like, that's gotta be a good sign. Like, and the post was about like viruses. So I'm like, that's gotta be a good sign. So I sent the email, and I was like, like so nervous. And he emailed me back in like less than 2 hours.
Yep.
And I'm like, and so, immediately I'm like, all right, this is going to be a good lab, because in my uh, email, I had included, like my statement of interest and all of that, my research statement. And in that, I wrote how when I was a little kid, my dad would call me Professor Jessie, because all I'd ever do is lecture to my family about like things that I learned, or things about animals and bugs and all of that. And so when I got the email from Seth, he responded to it as, hi there, Professor Jessie. And so I was like, all right, that's it. So immediately I was like, this is going to be like a great lab. And like, that was just like, and it was such a cool email, it was really neat. And so, like we, agreed to meet over Zoom, and talked about like research interests and the projects that are going on in his lab. And then we had, I think, like 3 or 4 Zoom meetings before I even went for my interview. So that was really cool. And it really helped too, because like I'd never been to a grad school interview. I'd never even stayed in a hotel by myself before. So like I was so nervous. And when I got there, I walked in, and like some other members from the lab were there, and like I was able to say hi, and like we were talking, and I'm like, oh, this is so cool. Like I already, like, I feel like I know the lab just from like these like Zoom meetings that we've been having, and like reading papers, and like going over papers, before I've even like been here. So like that was really cool. And I really like just appreciated that like he took the time to do all that stuff with me, because like I'm sure, of course, he's super busy. Everybody is super busy, and so that everybody in the lab took the time to kind of like walk me through introductions and papers and research and the projects, was just like really, really cool. So
Well,
like
you do have
really
to like
appreciate
moon pies if you're going to be around Seth. See,
that.
you remember this.
Yeah.
What's really important here is this follows your previous theme, where there's a
Yeah.
possible roadblock. I'm not going to say that you ran through it, but you certainly did like a high jump over it because of the energy it took to do it. You felt the fear, you did it anyway. And did you see in yourself that nagging little voice that says, oh, you can't do this? Oh, you're
Oh
not
yeah.
good enough for this. And I don't know
Yeah.
who is responsible for that voice. We all seem to have it. Some people are really good at ignoring that voice. And what you've learned is ignoring that voice really pays off. Now, I've got to
Yeah.
say that Dr. Bordenstein is a pretty amazing fella, and I've
Yeah.
known him for a number of years. And again, my story is much like yours, somebody I wrote to who's been very pleasant and kind to me in response. And there's an expression, and I know that you'll live this life, and the term is to pay it forward. If someone's been nice to you, it's important to pay that forward. And that's,
Yeah.
I'm sure, what Seth is thinking when he's doing that. You're thinking he's awful busy, and yes, he is. But part of the contract is he pays it forward. And look what it's given you.
Yeah.
And in your
Yeah.
most
Absolutely.
recent email with me, you're even saying to yourself, I've become interested in the viruses of Wolbachia, which we've talked about. Well, certainly we've talked about Wolbachia on the podcast. What I'm hoping is that you will come on the podcast later and talk about WO, the virus of Wolbachia, because I think that would be great. I'm not telling you to do it now, but in grad school, are you kidding? This will be a really good thing for people to hear. Now, Jess, I can appreciate having a certain degree of allergy to math, but sadly, as the way that biology has developed, especially microbial sciences, there's more and more use for certainly statistics, and I would argue in bioinformatics there's a certain degree of higher math involved too. How do you square that with some of your latter concerns with mathematics?
Well, I think step one for that was learning that I actually do really like math. So my experiences in high school, I think, were, again, like, it was all in my head. Like, I built it up to be so much worse than it actually was, and it wasn't that bad. And I think too, like, I didn't, my parents, like, I love my parents, but I don't think they realized how much I was struggling when I was younger. So they didn't realize that, like, I wasn't doing bad in math because I didn't understand the material. I wasn't going to class. Like, I was making up reasons that I couldn't do it when I could do it. And so I think for me, it was different when I was in college, and this time I'm paying for it. Like, this is my money. Like, this is like I'm either going to pass this class or I'm not doing this. And that changed things for me a little bit. I think, again, like that goes back to the whole thing of like kind of like growing up a little bit. Like I needed to do that. That was a vital step for me. And so once I started doing math, I realized like, I like this. This is fun. Like, and like calculus, like oh my gosh, like I loved differentials. Like that was so much fun. Like, I don't know. Like it's funny to me. Like if I could talk to my like 14-year-old self, like she would probably be like, you're such a liar. Like stop. So, yeah, I think, and stat, like I love statistics now. So like yeah, I don't know.
It's being at the right place in the right time.
Yep. Exactly.
What is it? The time is a moving river? That's kind of what we're dealing with here, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I did it with chemistry too. I put off taking chemistry until the very, very end. And then what do you know? Like I really liked chemistry. I really liked physics. I was not a fan of organic chemistry, but I really liked regular chemistry and I really liked physics. So but yeah, like classes that I just was like, I don't want to take that class. And then it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. It was great, actually.
So what a wonderful story that you've told when you think about it.
Yeah. It's been a journey. Like, I mean, that's like not even a half of it. It's definitely been, it's been like like at the same, simultaneously like a long journey, but also like really like it's been like, getting whiplash here from like just everything kind of like falling into place. Like,
but it's a good kind of whiplash, isn't it? Right?
Yeah. And I think, I didn't mention too, like kind of two kind of like funny things,
Please.
with the grad school process. So, one, I was asked, when I was at Penn State, like, how many schools did you apply to? Like, just out of curiosity. And one. So, and I don't think that, like, I don't know if anybody actually believed me or they thought I was crazy, but like, no, like I applied to one school. And so the one thing that I think kind of like shows how a combination of like how badly I wanted to go and also that I might be like a little bit nuts. After I left my interview, so I was there for like, 2 days. When I left, I went right to a house that I was interested in and went under contract on the house because I knew that like the chances that I'd be able to get there in the summer to potentially start a little bit earlier, which was something that we had talked about, the way everything is and how like bad the market is, I'm like, yeah, let's just try it. So I took a big risk with that, but I wanted to make sure that it could happen.
So once again, it's a path with heart. And it really is. This is what you found. And what I think is so interesting is that I can see you as a mentor for other budding scientists as well. And I mean, I've got to tell you, when I listen to your story, I think it's daunting. But that's not how you see it at all. I didn't say you saw it as easy. You saw it as a series of not hoops, but hurdles to jump over. And you did all of them because, number one, the most important thing, you never gave up. And also, you wanted to know what happened next.
Yeah.
Which is really
definitely.
critical.
Still,
now, as we
still
go
interested
ahead.
in seeing what's going to happen next,
And I was going to say that I also know from contact with you that I don't know if you still do it, but you used to blog. And you're certainly on social media, and I will make all those materials available for people. Do you have any last minute advice for people that are thinking about perhaps in the fall applying for graduate school?
Yeah. I do have a blog. It's actually not that I used to, it's that I'm starting to. So I got the website, I got the domain, I've got everything like, I'm still like getting everything like kind of finalized on it before I start putting writing in. But yeah, I do have some writing that I'm getting ready to move into it. So I do have that.
We'll have to put a link up to it because we want other people to be there.
Yes. And it's going to be, I kind of just want to have it as like a blog that's meant for like high school students
Mm-hmm.
or like people who are maybe not even in school, who are just interested in microbiology and related fields. So just kind of like breaking down concepts and terminology at a level that's digestible for people who aren't maybe necessarily upper level in college. Because we can get textbooks, we can get ebooks and things like that. We know a lot of the stuff by that point. I kind of want to have something that's like a resource for younger learners, early learners, not necessarily younger. And then, yeah.
Well, I promise you're going to be someone who will be worth a follow to watch your adventures, because if they're anything like the route that's taking you here, it's going to be like a thrill ride for other people to be involved with. And I have to tell you, I look forward to seeing how your career unfolds. And it has been such a pleasure to have you on the podcast. And I wanted to wish you and yours. Now, you have a number of unusual pets. I know that.
I do. And I'm sorry. I realize you asked me about advice for students going to grad school. I knew I was missing something there. I tend to ramble, so I'm
That's
sorry
okay.
about that. If, students going into grad school, like, or who are starting the application cycle, I think my biggest advice is if you need help, get help. Talk to somebody. I heard that there was a faculty member who had just started. I didn't know her. She was like fresh out of grad school. So I knocked on her office door and I asked her for advice. And she was really helpful. So like, just if you're not sure about something, like, go and seek help, talk to somebody, talk to people who have like just been through the process or are going through the process. And stop. Don't idolize the subreddits. Because I caught myself doing that, going on like the grad school admission subreddits and places like that, where there's just like constantly students sharing their CVs and their GPAs and like all of their extensive research experience and all of these things. And it's like, stop, don't even go on there. Don't even worry about that. Like, you don't need to worry about what somebody else is doing, what somebody else's work is. Just get your research experience in. Don't focus on GPA. I mean, obviously, keep your grades up, but just make sure you get that research experience in, because that's going to be the most important thing. But make sure that like where you're applying is somewhere that you really think you might want to be. Don't pick a school because of prestige or because of like, you think it sounds good or it's going to look good. Make sure that like it's something that you really want to do. And again, like, seek help. If you're not sure, if you're like, curious about something, or if you're nervous, just talk to somebody, anybody. People will be more than happy to help you. I will be happy to help if somebody wants to reach out to me or send me an email. I'm more than happy to walk anybody else through the process.
That is just wonderful to hear. And again, you have a rich and interesting life, and everyone is looking forward to following what you do with it on your new journey that's beginning. And
Yes.
I look forward to seeing it. So I wanted to wish you and yours, including a number of interesting pets, the very best of wishes. And I hope to have you on the podcast again at some point to share your new experiences in graduate school.
Definitely. I would love to come back on again. And yes, me and all of my pets. I have like some tarantulas in the background. So again, I love bugs. So yep, Penn State. Great spot to be. So yes, thanks, Mark. It was great to be here and to be able to talk, and it was a really cool opportunity. So I appreciate it.
Thank you again so very much.
Absolutely.
This has been Matters Microbial, a weekly podcast about the wonders of our microbial world and the people who study it. You can send questions, suggestions, or comments to me at mattersmicrobial@gmail.com. Show notes from today's episode that will amaze you can be found at microbe.tv/mm. If you like our work, please consider supporting us at microbe.tv/contribute. I'm Doc Martin, and you can find me in the biology department of the University of Puget Sound in Tacoma, Washington. Jessica Buchser will be entering as a PhD student in the laboratory of Dr. Seth Bordenstein of Penn State University in the fall. Many thanks to David Renata for superb editing, and Reber Clark for the wonderfully quirky music as always. I hope that you've all enjoyed being part of our Quality Quorum today. See you next time on Matters Microbial.